We are live. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Jesse Miller. Thanks very much for joining me today, this Friday afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, David. It's looking forward to talking with you about whatever.
Perfect. I like to keep all my conversation unscripted. It makes it more natural,
Yep.
and it's almost an assumption, like two cybersecurity professionals or people just meet at a conference and they have a chance to get to know each other in a much more natural way. So why don't we get started? And let me ask you a couple questions. So you have quite the presence online on LinkedIn and other platforms, and that's what
Yep.
kind of attracted me to have this conversation to begin with. And you are a huge proponent of helping organizations build MSPs and MSSPs.
hmm
But beside that, maybe kind of walk us through memory lane and how you got started, and so kind of build the cloud to what you're about to say and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually envy people that are coming up in cybersecurity these days because they have a path. There wasn't necessarily a path. I think people that are my age, 40 and over, I'll date myself there. We kind of found our way into security through kind of a winding road. And so mine started working for carrier services back when I was 19 years old. I worked for Ameritech, and then they were acquired by, I think, SBC, which was then acquired by AT&T, and got out of that industry after the dot-com bubble. Had really developed a love for the Cisco command line during that. So I went to school and got my degree in Cisco networking, and right out of school got a job with a startup MSP, managed service provider. And so again, it was very not a very targeted path. Just kind of went to a career fair, talked to the ownership, and it seemed like a good fit. So
And let me tell
went
you,
and worked.
just to kind of double click on it, it's funny. After talking to hundreds of individuals, it's never is. People have this
No,
mindset that they kind of created this path for themselves, and most often than not, it's completely random.
I tell people kind of tongue in cheek that I feel like my career path has been one big tumble down the stairs. But
I like that. I like that.
So no, so went and worked. I was employee number 5 at the startup. Didn't really know if it was going to work, but there was something about the ownership there that I really was drawn to, and that was a good decision, or a fortunate decision, I guess. Helped them grow the IT MSP practice up to be very successful. Built several cloud offerings, and kind of throughout that time was the go-to security guy for when things needed to be hacked into, or we'd go into um, we'd take over a client from maybe not a very good provider or an internal IT guy, and we'd need to get into systems. So I was, oh, we could do that. Dump the SAM database, crack the passwords, get in. So started doing some of that, and then was also building some cloud services for the MSP as well, and had to defend those kind of as an ancillary function of my job as director of infrastructure at the time. And so about 6 years ago, again, the ownership here, it's the Stratosphere Networks was the company, was very, I think both owners had really good vision in terms of the industry and kind of what's next. And they said, hey, we want to build a managed security service practice. And, you had a lot of success with what you've done so far. Do you think you could build us a security practice and focus fully on that? And, I was remember being a little bit resistant to it at the time. Like, well, no, I'm having so much fun doing all this different stuff. Like, but, yeah, I'll do it. And so dove headlong into security. And that's why I say it was almost like I didn't want to do it. But then when I started doing it, absolutely lit me up. And I kind of found my calling. And
And
this was about 6 years ago, and was named a CISO quickly, built a full stack security offering, from, managed detection and response, threat hunting, advisory engineering, even a vCISO practice, and was highly successful in doing that at a time when MSPs were not really thinking about security, or very few of them were. And, you know, built that to a 7-figure business from zero, which was a super cool accomplishment. I'm still very proud of that. And then we were acquired last year. So we went to work for the new company, ran their vCISO program for a while for them, and went through a reduction in force, as I think a lot of people experienced, and was kind of for the first time in 20 years thinking, well, what's next? what do I really want to do? What do I want to be when I grow up? And I thought about it and said, what am I good at? How can I bring value to the world? And it really just dawned on me there's still so many managed service providers out there who are really struggling delivering security to their clients. And that's not only affecting them, it's affecting their clients as well. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to start this niche consulting business helping managed security providers and managed service providers deliver and scale effective security programs. So that becomes a force multiplier, not only for the MSP, but also for their clients. And it becomes a big circle of value, as I like to say. And so I know I've been talking for a bit, but as you can tell, I get very excited when we start
No,
talking about
I
this.
love that. I can totally, see the passion and how you progress, and it's truly remarkable. And it's amazing because you kind of you had a lot of OJT, on the job training, meaning that you kind of reinvent yourself while you
Hmm.
were taking on ownership of a new role. But let me ask you
Yeah.
this, specifically when you were doing the right things at the MS, like building that practice. Back then, there wasn't a manual per se, right? There wasn't anything that you can say,
Right.
um, okay, this is the way it should be done. How, you had to kind
Yeah.
of figure out your own path. How did you go about that? As you mentioned, you started small, picking up certain services, and you kind of grew the business. What was that like? And how did you decide what to do next?
Well, yeah, that actually brings up an interesting point that I try to tell people is I think a way to innovate and a way to really check yourself is to do what I call show your work. So I'm not someone to just ask why. So if people are saying this is the way something should be done, I almost like to not take their word for it and go show my work, go through the process of thinking through it. What do I really think about this in a vacuum and come to my conclusion and then check that conclusion against what the consensus is saying. And if it's the same, yeah, great. I can subscribe to that now. I've kind of checked it out. And sometimes I might say, well, actually, I didn't come to that same conclusion. Why didn't I? Well, that maybe I made a mistake somewhere and I can go find that out. But every once in a while, you have that realization that we're all doing this completely wrong and we need to change. And so I think that's a really good starting point to answer your question. It's kind of putting yourself in a vacuum and saying, what do I really think about this? How would I want this to be delivered? What's actually going to bring value to the client? And so I think empathy is a big part of that. EQ is a big part of that. And not having a blueprint, it was really sitting down and going to the drawing board. So saying, okay, we want to deliver a vCISO product to our clients. How do we do that? What's it going to take? How many hours do we think we're going to spend doing this? What does the client want? Going and testing that with a group of our clients that trust us. Say, hey, we're working on this service. This is what we want to do. Yes, we like this. No, we don't like that. Okay, let's go back to the drawing board. So really kind of taking a lean approach to things and getting quick iterations out there, getting feedback and then adjusting and then just keeping that spiral going. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it, but I think that's kind of the thought process that I would take to it. Yeah.
do-
Okay.
So you were obviously, you came to customers and they saw you as a subject matter expert in a lot of cases. That's on one hand, but then when
Hmm.
you were creating some of these services and products offering, you were, I would say, almost faking until you make it kind of thing, right? Because you didn't have necessarily the finished product, but as you mentioned, you went to customers
Yeah.
that know you and trusted you. It's a fine balance between
Hmm.
doing that and being successful. Were there times where you're uncertain about what you're about to offer, meaning that you weren't sure that it's going to work, and had to kind of balance it all out to until things really fall into place and you have a cohesive
Yeah.
service and offering?
Yeah, absolutely. There were times like that. I mean, it's something I thrive on though, is kind of not the thrill of faking it, but the thrill of being pushed to your limits. And, I don't want to discount there was a lot of hard work. I'm someone who's a voracious learner. And so, okay, we're going to attack this, Okay, where's the CISSP material? Okay, read through all that. Took several SANS courses, got through all that. Reading anything I can get my hands on. I mean, I'm old. I'm older now, so these days are kind of gone. But staying up till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, sometimes not sleeping, reading through subject matter, and just really immersing myself to be able to be so over prepared that there's nothing that the client couldn't throw at me that I didn't know how to answer. And so I think there was a piece of that of just being extremely tenacious that helped overcome that. I'm part Finnish, and I that's kind of what I claim, I guess, in terms of my ethnicity. And we have a term called sisu, and it basically doesn't have an English translation, but it means overwhelming fortitude in the face of basically unwinnable odds. And so it's extreme grit if you wanted to try and have an English equivalent. And so I really bring that tenacity to any subject I come to when it comes to these kinds of things. And so I think that was really helpful. And I think if people are trying to do those kinds of things, they have to be prepared to be very stalwart and push through when it seems like you can't do it.
Yeah, and so it seems like you were balancing out the fact that you were paving the new road, but you were making sure you have all that tenacity and learning behind you, so you were well prepared, to
Right.
overcome any challenges it may be,
Yep.
and making sure that the product, even though it might not be completely done, you still have all your ducks in a row to make sure it's successful. Now, tell me, that time 6 years ago, 6 7 years ago, there seems to be a huge movement towards outsourcing well, IT services were always an outsource kind of thing. Well, they were outsourced and then brought back in house and then back into
Mhm.
outsourcing. But for MSSP specifically, there's a huge movement towards outsourcing these services. Can you give me just a kind of primer on why that is and what's pushing this industry to for companies to kind of get the expertise of third parties to manage and handle all the security services and products?
Yeah, I think it's the speed of industry is one of the reasons. There's things are moving so quickly now. You see that with AI, and so to try and then pivot internally and build these specialized groups quickly is out of reach. I think for a lot of organizations, at least to do that effectively, unless they're extremely large. So that's one piece. Having a stable of experts in a given technology that you can dive into when you need it, I think is one piece. So the expertise or the siloed or focused expertise, having kind of a well to draw from. And I think the other piece is there are cost savings to be had there as well. Now you have to be careful in the providers you're choosing because if you get in bed with a bad partner, that there's stories. I mean, I'm sure you know that um, that can be detrimental to the organization. But I think choosing the right MSSP or MSP to work with, you're going to see almost instant cost savings and a level up in your expertise. And so those are all win-win-wins when you think about it from a business perspective. And so I think that's driving the rise of it. And really, you're seeing a shift to a focused fractional services model in almost everything these days, I think, due to that. Organizations are more focused on OpEx than they are CapEx. And so those kinds of consumption models are much easier financially to digest just in terms of the financial cycle that organizations are in this current landscape.
Yeah, almost a utility model, right? You pay for what you use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything as a
Mm-hmm.
service. So,
Yep.
if you don't mind me asking, let's talk a bit about something you brought up, picking the right partner. So somebody as
Mm-hmm.
and you have the cloud to provide some insight into that. So what are the top one or two,
Yeah.
three things that you would consider before, as you mentioned, going getting in bed with a service provider? And how would you know if they're any good?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first thing is identifying why you're outsourcing and having a really good idea of what you need to outsource and where you want to plug that provider in. So, not looking at it as a panacea, So I think that's number one, really understanding your needs and where you want to outsource, and then finding providers that fit that. Because there could be a good provider that maybe is not specialized in the way that you needed or wanted them to be. And you didn't outline that well in terms of your organization's selection process. So I think there's some onus there to make sure you're doing your due diligence. Now, second thing, in terms of choosing reputable providers, I think is, you know, talk talking asking them to walk you through kind of their process, having a set way of, again, this feeds back into your selection process, but hey, tell me how you'd run through this, show me how this works, having them kind of walk you through the processes of how they handle a ticket. And I think you spot, and not just ticket but a project or anything, I think you spot some pretty glaring issues where you say, okay, they walk you through that and you're like, well, what about that? Oh, well, that's extra, or oh, well, that doesn't count. And then you start to kind of unearth those pieces. And then third, I think, is talking to references. I mean, I think it's really important to ask for references, find people that are in your industry, and if they can't give that to you, there might be a way to have them write in a guarantee or do something like that. But again, references are a big piece of being able to talk to their clients and say, what do you and what don't you like about this provider? Because nobody's perfect. And again, I'm very pro MSP. I work with MSPs. I've been in managed services. I firmly believe it's the best way that an organization can get value. But I will say that no organization is without their warts, and we all know that. So what don't you like? Okay, X, Y, and Z, they could get better here. They could do this better. And you say, okay, well, can we live with that? Yeah. That's it's something we'll just have to keep an eye out for and work on. So I think those three things really help you begin to assess what an organization looks like. And that's more of a uh, qualitative means, but I think also then having a very step through process, a system of checks and balances that says, or checklist that we want to check X, Y, and Z that they do, and a scorecard, so to speak, and saying, being very clear again in the deal process, here's the things we expect, and here's the things you agree to do. And then the last piece feeding into that is service management. Talk to your providers about how they do that middle layer of ITIL. How do they manage the managed services that they're providing you? How do they measure those to make sure you're getting what you want? Is there a system to do that? If there isn't, I would wager that there could be issues down the road there. So that's a really important piece to pick out when you're working with managed service providers.
Yeah, and it's probably something you can cover through your PowerPSA, right? And we're going to touch upon that really briefly. But before
Yeah.
that, I would like to also ask, what's the is there a place for the kind of culture or meshing of personalities? Is that any has any importance in terms of picking the right provider? Because sometimes you can have all the check marks, but then management does not mesh well with management for the service provider, and potentially that can cause
Hmm.
some issues down the road. And it's something that's intangible. It's not something you can put in a
Yeah.
scorecard per se. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I haven't gotten that question before. It's actually a great question. You made me pause there. So, but I think off the cuff, that's where the table topping that I was going into, I think really helps. Because if they start doing this when you ask hard questions, instead of being honest and forthright, or you just don't mesh, you're going to spot that pretty quickly. And that's why, tabletops are great for not just security incident response, but I think you're going to uncover some of those intangibles and some of that can we work together type of thing as you do those. So,
And maybe that's it, like the perfect way. So, for example, I know in the military, a lot of times there's a selection process, right, for some of the elite units, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to see how you handle under pressure.
mhm,
And I think in as you mentioned, maybe a
yeah,
tabletop exercise or something like that that puts everybody under pressure to create, and it's okay even
mhm,
to kind of blow it up in a micro sense, and just to see how everybody acts, right? So because you know
mhm,
way more about a service provider when
yep,
they f up than you know when they do the right thing, and then they have an opportunity to really shine when something like that goes wrong. So how would you create that situation where you
yeah.
potentially
Eh,
have something like that happen?
yeah, I think, again, I think a couple tabletop scenarios are great. and we're kind of riffing here because I said I haven't had this question before, but I think, taking me through, okay, uh, we have a server down at our data center or an application down. You have to, again, customize it for your organization. How would you handle this? How does this get routed? When does it get escalated? And then even design your own injects for it, And I think don't spring this on them. I think it's fair to say, hey, we like to run tabletops with our providers to see how they'd handle different scenarios. Are you guys open to that? Um, could be a great way to go about it. So,
In your
and it
experience.
goes
Mhm.
back to what you were talking. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. There's a bit of delay, but go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you
Well,
off.
no, I was going to say, yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of, asking me like, how did, you were coming into this with new services often to your clients. How did you handle it uh, when things didn't go right? And I think, going back to a military term, what's the an overwhelming force of fire, right? So when something goes wrong, everybody to that point, and let's go until we fix it, and we'll turn it around and say, yeah, we made a mistake. It's not going to happen again. Here's what we've done, X, Y, and Z to fix it. And so it's that whole attitude of, yeah, we effed up, like you said, but we're going to fix this.
And let me ask you this: if you could quantify, from the easiest to the hardest, what would that be from an outsource perspective? Like, what type of services are the easiest to outsource and the most hardest to outsource? And then where would you start if you wanted to, get you mentioned the tabletop, but let's say you kind of
Mhm.
pass through that. What's the next phase
Yeah.
after that in terms of outsourcing? What would you take on after that?
Yeah. I think some of the easiest ones to do are the best process ones. So if you can say, here's how we do things, X, Y, and Z, more transactional type of things. So again, I see this just as a vCISO working in different sizes of orgs. Even Fortune 500 organizations are starting to outsource their SOC, their tier one SOC, because they realize that just to maintain that internally is not cost effective, and especially when you have organizations out there that are highly focused on that, and it's very transactional. Now, there's uh, there's little tendrils of things that don't go exactly as planned, but bottom line is things that are super processed and transactional, such as alert triage, you can outsource that almost immediately as long as you have it processed out well. And so I think that would probably be what I would say would be the easiest. And then the higher you go, the more strategic you get, the harder it is to offer services. Two really hard services for MSPs to offer, or MSSPs to offer, is strategic consulting, vCISO, whatever you want to call it, and vulnerability management, because there's so much nuance to each customer's environment there. You can't process that out. Well, you can, and I that's kind of what I choose to change, but to a point, you have to kind of, each customer is their own little special snowflake, so to speak. And so in those different environments, you have to have uh, higher intelligence resources, people that have more soft skills to be able to work between different groups and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive into a bit about Power PSA and your approach. And if you don't mind, you use the term force multipliers, both for the customers and the MSP. Could you
Hmm.
mind expanding on that? What does that mean? And what does that mean for the company, and specifically in terms of
Yeah.
how you offer the services, and what's the outcome of these force multiplier when it's done successfully?
Yeah. So I think force multipliers, as I'm using it, there's really two avenues to that. So one is a force multiplier of value, right? I'm taking something that I've built over a lifetime of success in terms of building successful and operational programs, and just operations is something that comes extremely natural to me. I'm almost a savant, an idiot savant in that way, because I could be, I can't remember where I set my keys, but I can design you a perfect process for how to run a technical program. But point being is that taking that knowledge that I have and being able to distribute it and disseminate it in the way that the MSP or the MSSP can take it, and then build in and automate processes to grow their margins, which is like the flywheel concept, right? You can hire better people then. Your people aren't as overworked. They can focus in on customers better. And then that becomes a force multiplier of value into the customer. The customer is getting better service. They're able to focus on their business. Their customers, in turn, are getting a better product. And it's this ripple effect that you see go out through the MSP and then through to their clients and then through to those clients. And it's really exciting to me to think about how impactful that can be. So
And it's so interesting because now these days, almost you have a lifetime of experience, right? I'm going to go off on a tangent here and we'll say, you can go to ChatGPT 4.0 and say, build me a plan, an operational plan for an MSSP with
mhm,
vCISO, SOC as a service, pen testing, and endpoint security management. And please create
mhm.
a significant plan, and then you're off to the races. But you created it for so many years. Is there added value of somebody like yourself working with a customer company that wants to embark on that journey to become a successful service provider?
Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. And that's kind of when I decided to be very active on LinkedIn, I kind of made the decision. I'm not going to hide, keep information close to the chest. I'm going to put plans out there. I just put an article out on how to build really successful vCISO reports, and I just kind of gave everyone my playbook because I think to your Chat GPT point, you can go get that, but then you have to execute against that every single day, right? So you can get the plan, you can get a piece of paper that lists all the things out, but how do you actually iterate through that? And how do you deal with problems when they arise? And there's a whole other set of contextual issues that I think only a human can solve. And maybe 20 years from now, that'll be different. But I think now that's where the value comes in. And secondly, uh, again, I take a more inductive approach with my clients. I've been in engagements with consultants who come in, efficiency consultants, and these were good engagements. I'm not knocking these people or these companies, but they're very prescriptive. They say, "Here's our playbook. Set your PSA up this way. Make sure to use all these codes," and it just doesn't work well for the organization. I take a more inductive approach. I come in and do an assessment. I say, how what's the DNA of your organization? Why do your customers love you? I mean, you're in business for a reason, right? There's something you're doing right. Let's take that and let's build that into the process. And so while there are prescriptive pieces to it, I think taking an organization's DNA and building that into the process of how we automate things, and then that brings to my number 2 point I was talking about force multipliers, is once we've built these processes and got them in place, and kind of iterated over them and we feel good about the way a system's working, then we go to work automating as any piece of it that we can. We find repetitive tasks that people are doing, and once we have a process that's repeatable, we go and automate that. Yeah, we use ChatGPT to do certain things. This year, I started uh, writing all my scopes of work with ChatGPT. So I have these reflexive prompts that I have a template I fire into ChatGPT, and I have a notes from discovery calls that I'm doing. Again, here's a playbook, a way people can take this and go use it. It's fine. And then uh, fire that with the notes from the call, the scope, and ask ChatGPT to write me a scope speaking to that, and then ask it questions. This is an interesting exercise. Ask it questions as if it's different people in the organization. Okay, Chat GPT, now pretend you're legal counsel for the organization. What problems would you have with this scope? Oh, I'd have these problems. Okay, now pretend you're engineering. What problems would you have? And of course, there's still that human intervention. You have to go through and then say, okay, certain things I didn't love, but it's shortened my scope writing from, 2 to 4 hours to write a really complex scope down to half an hour or an hour. And so those are the kinds of automations and wins we can use to create force multipliers within these managed service providers, allowing our employees to get back to doing the EQ and serving the customer.
When I hear you speak about this process, I what I hear creativity. Like you're being creative about how you approach it, and there's a bit of a like a like magic behind it, because again, there's all this, again, you mentioned there's a playbook, there's things you show up in the open and it's scripted, but there's a lot of things that are requires our intelligence that is not found currently at technologies like ChatGPT, and a lot of it is just from
Mhm.
experience, right? So if I give an example, like when you make the assessment, I'm assuming that somehow you know where to start, like in the sense that you know what's the best bang for the buck. How can I make the most impact to the organization? And yes, you can probably quantify and create some
Right.
sort of matrix, but a lot of it is just from you being there, doing that, getting the T-shirt, and have all these scars to show for it, that you know what to do. You know, and that's almost like being
Yeah.
creative
Yeah.
about
No, it's
where to start.
yeah, that's it's interesting that you say that. I really do enjoy being creative. I produced hip hop and R&B and dance music for about 10 years, from about 18 to 28, and that didn't work out, so I ended up in technology, but that's a story for another day. So I really do enjoy that piece of it, and I think you're right. It's really just talking to people and whiteboarding. So that's a great place to start. I mean, if you want to try and, again, my thing is, if people can take what I'm posting about and what I'm talking about and go and make changes in their organizations for the better, that makes me super happy. And if you can do that, you probably didn't need my help anyway, right? But so go ahead and use this. Just sit down with your people and ask them questions, and get a bunch of people in the room and start whiteboarding out, how do we do things? And make sure you have different levels in the organization. Talk to executive management, talk to middle management, talk to the people on the front lines, talk to project management, and have them all tell you what the problems are. And it might say different things, but you're going to identify some common threads running through what everyone's saying. And that's where you find your places to start. And that's the creative, inductive piece of it, like you were talking about. And then you start whiteboarding, and people say, you kind of watch the light bulb come on as they're drawing out. We do this and then we do this, and they realize it's just a big horseshoe. Oh, wait, we're doing it that way? Yeah, we're doing it that way. Okay, well, we found something we can fix. Let's focus on that, right? Force of fire, knock that out, and then move on to the next, automate, and the cycle continues. And that's when things get really fun, is when you start to see the smiles come back to people's faces again.
And today, what are the kind of the main challenges for MSSPs that want to improve and create like exceptional services for their companies? Which areas of the business do you help them the most, and in which areas do they really struggle that really require some hand holding?
Yeah, I think, now I'm going to speak generally here,
Yeah, that's
because
fine.
there are definitely places that do this really well. But I think a lot of times is there's two things. A lot of times when things are really bad, people can't see a way out, and they're struggling so hard to keep their head above water doing the day to day. The thought of taking a day or a week to sit down and not just start not bailing buckets of water out of the ship can seem paramount to death, right? Like, we cannot do that. So I think there's a problem in really getting people to step back and just say, "Hey, things aren't going to go anywhere for a week. Let's take and do some improvement for a week, and watch as that cycles back into the system, and these things start to get better." And it's going to be really painful at first. It might be. So that's one. That's on the operational side. And then I think the other piece is too is, um, I think lack of focus in target clientele. I see a lot of issues with people just taking work from whoever because we need to make money, and we don't have a really well defined ideal client profile, or ICP, and maybe 2 to 3 verticals that we specialize in and go after. Again, it's a long term view, and you see MSPs that do that, and those are the ones that are growing, right? And you can charge more. You can charge more for your services, because you're saying, "Hey, we're servicing this vertical. We know what things cost," and again, that translates into operational efficiencies too, because when you have 30 different markets that you're working in, there's differences for each of those. uh, the pod format, right? In terms of support, you can't do the pod format when you have 30 different types of clientele. So you can't scale that. You get up to like that $10 million range, and becomes untenable, and you're just kind of hovering. When you then focus in on your ideal client profile, then you're getting customers that are similar. The pod systems start to work. The work spreads out using the lean principle of WIP, right? You can bring resources in to bottlenecks because they kind of understand, even though they might not work at it as a primary, to help out. And so the whole system starts to equalize and have equilibrium uh, in it. So I think those are the three things probably I see as a lot of problems.
And what about the accidental MSSP? You know, the IT guy, cybersecurity guy who you started a practice with a couple of buddies because they were asked by the other buddies to create a service, and then they
Yeah.
grew through just word of mouth, and they took on all their
Yeah.
friends and families, and all of a sudden they had too much to handle. And
Yeah.
you know, that process you describe is something that is very foreign to them. You know, how do you get, because it's, again, you for example, you even to know when to turn down a customer is an art form, and how to turn down a customer,
Hmm.
because you mentioned if they don't fit your profile, you're going to lose money on them. You're not Nobody's going to be happy, and then it will hurt your business. All of that is it's easier said than done. It's almost like sometimes it's like you, maybe somebody external like yourself will be the right person to knock them over the
Yeah.
head with it, and make sure they don't follow, follow the money and just accept any customer that they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I mean, that is probably one of the hardest things to do, is to say no to a deal and walk away from a deal, and it takes tons of discipline. How do you do that? I think you do it through documentation and planning. So it's the same thing as working out. You can say, "Hey, I'm going to get up tomorrow and work out," but if you don't have a schedule of the exercises you're going to do and a plan, and you're writing those things down, you're probably not going to be very successful working out. But if you say, okay, tomorrow's chest day, I have these 10 exercises I'm going to do. I'm going to write down what they are. The day after that's cardio and then abs. All of a sudden, it becomes a plan and you're executing against it. And you say, and then someone comes along and says, hey, let's do chest today. Oh, I can't do chest today. I did chest yesterday. Or, tomorrow's my chest day. And so you become more disciplined, I think, through planning and intentionality and really putting those things down to paper, and then it's a self-actualizing or a fulfilling prophecy at that point.
And let me ask you this: we talked about the kind of framework, the operational side. What about technology? There are so many vendors out there that
Hmm.
their dream is to get as many service providers as they can, because they see it's the easiest way. It's path of least resistance to the marketplace. It's so hard to do enterprise sales. So why
Right.
don't we go out to MSSPs that have, hundreds of customers, and then we instantly get, a certain amount of revenue.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of vendors out
Yeah.
there that are after the MSSPs. Any feedback that you can provide from a selection process to the MSPs, and also maybe some on the other side of the house, like the vendors, what do they need to do in order for them to be attractive from a technology perspective as well
Yeah.
as services perspective? Because it's an art form to have a program in place for MSSPs to use their
Right.
technologies.
Right. Well, yeah. So I'll work backwards just because I found this really interesting recently. I've had a lot of people from vendors reaching out to me about engagements for channel enablement. So I'm actually doing some paid engagements with certain vendors about how to go to market with MSSPs or MSPs. And I think the easier you can make it for them is the better you're going to enable them. So I think I see so many vendors just saying, "Hey, use our product. It's awesome. It does X, Y, and Z," but they don't actually say, "Here's how you can use our product to make money." They don't show them a path to profit with the product. So I think vendors that can do that and do it well and really have a like not just say we want to go to MSSPs because we don't have to do marketing, right? They're gonna be our Trojan horse into this huge client base, right? And it's very attractive, but bottom line is, if you don't make it easy for the MSP or the MSSP, they're not going to use your services and you're not going to have success there. So it goes back to the same thing as an MSP going to their client base. Make it simple for them. Give them a step-by-step way to use your product to make money, and then you'll find success. Now for MSPs, how do I choose a product? Um, I would say before you go out and buy more products, MSPs are really tool focused. We, as technical people and being a technical person myself, we love the shiny new tech, right? We love new tools. We all love talking about Chat GPT. But have you done your patching this month, right? So it goes back to, you have a tool stack. And again, this is part of kind of how I work with my clients and say, are we using our tool stack efficiently? Do we have tool overlap? Again, documenting and processing things out. Do we have a set way we evaluate vendors? I have a 4-pillar system that I've developed over the years to evaluate vendors. As an MSSP or as an MSP, you have to ask, what is it going to take for me to sell it? Now that goes back to that vendor enablement thing I was talking about with software vendors. How hard or easy is it going to be to
Can
sell
you
this? Do the
just, you
prices
don't
make
mind,
right? Do you?
do you
Yeah,
mind just expanding? I love, but this is really important. So do you mind expanding on those
yeah,
points? So like when you say evaluation, like, how do you look
yeah,
at it? Is there any particular,
yeah,
when you say sales enablement, which is great, would you mind expanding a
yeah,
little bit?
yeah. Yeah, yeah, sure. So showing the MSP or the MSSP, how do they use your product to build it into an offering? Giving them a really clear path of what it takes to set the tool up. How much hours are they really going to sink into this tool? How much is it going to take on a month-to-month basis? How many hours are they going to have to use into it? How much work is it going to take? Um, how many knobs do we have to tweak every day? How many times do we have to touch this? Giving them a really clear sense of what that looks like allows them to then say, okay, I have to wrap these amount of services around this to deliver it effectively on top of the software price. I can now have a clear picture of what this product is going to cost me to deliver a service to my clients. And I can confidently charge my clients X amount and know that I'm going to make sufficient margins on that. Now, then you have to say, is that too high? Will my clients pay for that? Right. And some vendors I think are very out of touch with what they're charging and then expecting the MSP to deliver all those things. And so if their customer success isn't going to help the MSP with that kind of stuff and they're expecting the MSP to do all the technical and to do all the sales, then they better lower their prices to allow the MSP to it's economies of scale at that point. So hopefully that answers your
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. So basically, it's almost like a delivery success playbook that shows them from
Yeah. Yeah.
nuts to bolts. Like how do you deploy what's, and it's really interesting. It's almost trivial, but I've yet to come across a vendor that has a clear path that really explained exactly. Most of it, it's like they're winging it, right? They're providing the product to the
Yeah.
MSSP for
Yeah.
trial
Yeah.
and trying to let the MSSP figure it out on their own. What's included in deployment? How does it look
Yep.
like? And
Yep.
that's
Yep.
not it doesn't
Yep.
fly because the MSSP is busy doing some other stuff and taking care of existing customers. They don't have time to figure it out.
Yep. Yep. And well, you're going to see some of that soon. Let's just put it that way.
So
So
Jesse,
to
that
be
was the number one.
announced.
So that was the number
Yeah.
one. But you had three
Yeah.
other items that you mentioned, I think, or two other items that you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. And so these are more on the MSP side of things, right? So that's, what does it take to sell it? What does it take to implement it? And these all kind of feed into what I was talking about, right? As the MSP, you got to say, hey, when I've sold this and now I have to implement it, is it going to be a huge lift to get it into the client's environment? Some things are, like if you're turning on MFA and SASE for an organization that doesn't have any of that, you're going to have some work on your hands. Disk encryption is another one that is just a huge lift to get done. So you got to understand those things and you got to price those in um, accordingly. And then what does it take to support it? That's what I said. How many touches am I going to have to do? Is this are the alerts super chatty? Can I see a path to properly tuning this so it doesn't become just a complete nightmare for people to deal with on a day-to-day basis? What does my recurring operations look like for this? And then finally, one that a lot of people leave out is, what does it take to bill for this? Does this tool integrate with my billing on the back end? Is it going to be a nightmare for me to bill clients for this? How do I can't tell you, I've seen many organizations where they didn't think about that and people are literally going in every month and logging into a portal and looking at and counting how many devices are registered and then going and typing that into QuickBooks. And so that's not uncommon, unfortunately. And I think, and this is another piece that I'm very passionate about, is I think MSPs and MSSPs really need to start partnering with good RPA firms to be able to not only do some of that for themselves, but also to be able to deliver those kinds of services for their customers. So that goes more into business process. But something we've been talking about with some other webinars I've been on lately is, MSPs being a business process support analyst to their clients and looking for ways to streamline their clients' processes. And a lot of the ways I've just talked about for themselves. So, you're your own testing ground. You do this. Hey, this works for us. Let's bring this to our clients. And you just rinse and repeat that.
And a lot of times they get requests, MSP gets requests from their clients, meaning they come over and say, "Do you do
Mm-hmm.
this?" Is
Yeah.
that the best way to figure out like what's the next offering would be, or should they be proactive and build it before kind of anticipating, because it takes a little while for any kind of service offering to become available to the clients.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's kind of, it has to be a blend of both. I think you need to be out there, and I think talking to your clients, because again, this is another good piece of why MSPs are valuable to a normal business, is because they get a wide sampling of the industry, and especially if they're doing it right, like we talked about, and focusing on a certain vertical. Well, they're getting data points from everybody in the industry, and they can say, "Hey, a lot of people are doing X. Have you thought about X?" So I think it's partially having good communications within the sales organization and the account management of the organization, of the MSP I'm talking about here, so they can say, "Hey, a lot of our customers are talking this, or we're seeing this at these trade conferences. This is something we might want to start thinking about offering." Um, but then also there's the piece where, customers start asking for things. I can guarantee you a lot of MSPs didn't want to do security, or are doing it only as a function of their client saying, "Hey, we need to be secure." So I think a healthy blend of both is good. Yes, you can have good ideas, go talk to your clients, offer it, and don't be afraid to. This is another thing I see, MSPs keeping an offering out there because one or two clients use it, and it's just slowing their operations down because it's just not a popular offering, and it's eating up cycles within the business. Well, oh, but this client likes it, or that client likes it. Well, we have to do what's best for our business. What's better, to have this one client like it and suck all the life out of your ops, or to tear the band-aid off and serve all your other clients better for the sake of that one client? I mean, it's, when you say it that way, it's a no-brainer. But again, when you're in the whirlwind, it's hard to see the forest for the trees. So,
Yeah, and you can see, there's also a movement for MSPs and MSSPs buying other companies. They're growing through an acquisition. Seems to be a consolidation. It, is there like a scale advantage for larger organizations? Because I'm assuming that a lot of these processes don't really are not very much needed if the company is still small and is under like 20 employees and doing like $10 million in revenue.
mhm,
They can still get away with a lot of these things that you described. They're not the greatest, but once you start scaling,
mhm,
then you have the economies of scale. You can run a SOC efficiently. You can
right.
start maybe getting even discount from vendors and so on. Do you find that there's, because there are niche players out there that do a great job at certain types of services, and there are run of the mill larger MSSPs that provide everything under the sun. Do you think that the industry is going through a major consolidation and something is going to continue, or there's still going to be play for like smaller, quote unquote, the accidental uh, MSPs in the service providers?
Yeah, I think there will always be a place for those. But the problem is that they're probably going to be competing on price a lot of the time. So uh, the private equity and the mergers and acquisitions are only going to accelerate, in my opinion. Again, the financial windfall for the people doing it is far too great for it to stop. And and as you said, I think done right, you can serve bigger and better clientele. And again, that whole force multiplier principle. However, I think there is room, and we're seeing this now for companies that are smaller, the accidental MSP that you talked about, if they do shift their mindset and start thinking about these things and focusing on sales and marketing and taking their hands off the business a little bit and putting the right people in place and letting them do their job, taking some of these more corporate principles and applying them, I think there's a really good opportunity for those types of companies to grow into that 50 to 100 space and really do some cool things for their customers and provide that niche white glove, knowing the client's business inside and out, which can be really valuable for a certain type of company. And so, again, we're seeing this in the current landscape where there's a lot of reduction in force and layoffs going on in larger companies, but small businesses aren't seeing that as much, right? They're able to kind of capitalize on this. And so meeting their clients in the middle. And so I think there's some room there for a power vacuum almost to be filled, and is kind of waiting for these companies to step into it um, in this current economy. So I guess that'd be my take on it.
Can you share, as part of the journey of creating PowerPSA, can you share maybe some success stories, maybe some things that weren't as successful? Is it all that you aspire to be? Because again, it's being an entrepreneur
Mhm.
like you are right now.
Yeah.
It's a. I always say that there's, you can have a great day and a really lousy day the same day.
Yeah,
It really
that's true.
depends.
That's true. I was gonna I was gonna say there's definitely the first time being an entrepreneur now, I had, was an entrepreneur in a way building business lines within an organization, but it's with a safety net. At the end of the day, it's not your butt on the line if it doesn't work. So yeah, I'd say there's ups and downs. You can have a really great day where clients are loving what you're saying, and you're working with people, and things are changing, and you're seeing light bulbs come on in people's eyes, and that's really fun. And then you have some deal you thought was in the bag say, "Hey, we're not going to move forward." It just crushes your confidence. So like, and that's all in the same day, right? So it's I think there's definite piece to that, but I'll say what my wife says to me. She goes, "I haven't seen you this happy in years." So, and not that I'm a grumpy guy by any means, but she's like, "I can really tell that you're really enjoying what you're doing." And that's how I feel about it. It's yeah, there's just the people that I get to work with. One cool win story, and I have to be a little bit careful here. I don't want to expose the
Yeah, just
client, but
scrub the details.
one yeah. One cool win story was doing M&A due diligence for a client that was buying just a small MSP. They were their first MSP they were getting into, and being able to, with my knowledge, uncover some process things that allowed them to that they weren't really as good at on face value as they were being presented in the information memorandum, and just giving them that detail to be able to make a more informed decision and and actually move forward with confidence, knowing that they were going to have to do X, Y, and Z. So I think that force multiplier piece, giving someone the confidence to be able to make that decision and make it well, that was a really fun. That was a really fun win there. Yeah.
Jesse, I
So
think that there's a place for us to, or for you to potentially find a diamond in the rough. Meaning, you take an MSP or MSSP that does X amount of dollars, um, as prep it for an acquisition, knowing that you can come
right,
over and do a 5X within 2 years, just because you know exactly where,
right.
how to make it more effective and potentially operationally become way more successful than it is. It has the potential to become,
I absolutely,
5X.
absolutely, and I think I 100% agree with that. I mean, and to be frank, I've had some conversations with folks in PE for the same thing. So there's kind of two different models here. So PE firms are paying high multiples for organizations that are doing security, whether that's an MSP or a dyed-in-the-wool MSSP. But if I can come in and take their current personnel and maybe hire some new people, but build them a security service within it down the road when that they go to sell that organization, the multiples go up. And it's the same thing as succession planning for current MSP owners. You don't want to get to the end of the line and just be stringing the business along and get pennies on the dollar just because you didn't want to change, right? So yeah, completely agree with what you're saying there.
And if somebody wanted to start an MSP business, or MSSP business, just from scratch, saying like somebody who got
Mm-hmm.
laid off, or somebody like yourself decided that they've earned the stripes. They were maybe an IT manager or IT security manager at some firm, and now they want to dive in. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't answer don't do it, but anything aside from that, what would you
Yeah.
recommend? Where do you start?
Well, I think a good place to start is a lean business canvas. That's a good place to kind of put down on paper why you're doing what you want to do and why you want to do it. What are your differentiators? Helps you start targeting that ICP right off the jump. So I think that's important. And that might uncover some things that you say, actually, you know what? I don't know if I want to do this, or I need to change my approach. And then to get some trusted people to actually look at it and give you critical feedback, constructive, of course, but ask you hard questions. And so I think some planning is probably a good dose of planning is always advised when you're going into this, rather than like, I'm tired of working for the man, I'm going to go and start my own company, and go on LegalZoom and incorporate it, and off we go. So yeah, I think some good planning there. And then also understand, following that, once you've kind of identified those things, understanding how you're going to go to market and a plan for marketing and sales. And that might be outsourcing. I think paying a good marketing company a monthly fee for doing social and SEO, and then some SDR work, it'll pay dividends, right? Because if you don't have to focus on filling the funnel and you can focus on what you're really good at, you're going to be more successful. And then I think lastly is then working on a business plan, right? Because if you can, and finding maybe some investors, I know that's not always doable, but anyway, you can get some good cash to start off in the business and do some of these things initially is going to be more successful than if you have to bootstrap it. And I'll probably make some enemies saying that, but I think there's a good line, and we're not talking millions of dollars here, but if you can get $50,000 to $100,000 to start doing all these things for the first year, I think that's probably a good way to go about it. But you're not going to get that done if you haven't planned and haven't kind of showed the path to success for the potential investors. So,
And is this something that you help out with? Like, let's say, do you have a template that you mentioned that you can help out with potentially putting that together and going to market? And then maybe like the second piece of the question, would you start with something that is not a me too, or maybe like a more of a niche carved niche offering that will differentiate you, will not force but allow people to test you out because of that particular need, as opposed to just doing what everybody else is doing?
yeah, I think that does depend on the skill set of the people who are starting the business. So I happen to know of someone who I'm really happy about this, because I've been saying someone should do this for years. A friend of mine who is doing a pure Google Apps and Chromebook MSP. So secure by default, going after like maybe healthcare or just transactional law firm, call center, even DoD potentially stuff, where you built-in security, you provide the hardware, the security, uh, the MSP, all for a single end user price. So for startups, that's really good because it's built-in security. And so that would be an example of an interesting niche that's different, and I think will be successful for a small subset of clientele that want that service. So that's an example. But you have to decide what you're going to do. And it could be, hey, no, we're going to do Windows support and we're not going to do Macs, or we're going to do Macs and we're not going to do Windows. So I think deciding all of those things are important. Now, do I have templates for that? For the marketing and SDR stuff, I rely on partners. I have a couple good partners that I like to have bring in if people want help with that. And I do think they should. But in terms of like working through a business, a lean canvas, and kind of targeting in on what do we want to do strategically, absolutely, it's something I can help people with.
And is there a value of someone who's been there, done that specifically for that vertical? So I'll give an example. I've met with somebody who's a director for cybersecurity at a hospital, a healthcare provider. They used to be a nurse, and
Hmm.
I've dealt with somebody who was C-level executive at a hotel chain. They used to be front desk, meaning that they've learned the business from the ground up and have all that experience. So now when they're talking about IT and cybersecurity, because they understand the inner control of the business of all the functions, different functions of the
Hmm.
business units, so on, they have value, real value. So what about creating an MSP or MSSP that is specifically geared toward a certain vertical that the person has a background on? Maybe even construction, right? Somebody who's done construction and knows the construction
Yep.
business or the retail business. Is there value there?
Oh, I absolutely think so. It goes back. I mean, you're going to want to partner with a technical, whether it's co-founder or giving somebody equity to help you build that business, right? But it goes back to what I was saying about MSPs starting to be business consultants for their clients. So if you go in and you say, "Hey, I worked in this industry for 20 years and I saw a need for technology, and so I partnered with some really smart people to provide specific right-sized technology for your needs." I mean, that you're gonna crush it with in sales meetings, at least with that, you know? So I think, yeah, you have to provide the technical side of it. But I think absolutely there's place for that. And I think again, being a true business consultant that uses technology to enable business is the best story you can tell.
So let me, and we're running out of time, and this has been a really great conversation. I feel like we just uncovered, like, just the tip of the iceberg on some topics, and I'd love to maybe continue to do a second piece because I have so many questions. The more I ask you, the more questions I have. But let me ask you this,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
wrap up. Where do you see this industry going? And it's kind of a really open-ended question. We've seen a tremendous uplift of these services all across the board, and we see a lot of automation.
Yeah.
And there's some forces in play, like the financial market crunch a little bit, AI, and so on. Where's the market going? Are we
Mhm,
continuously seeing the development of these outsource providers? And
mhm.
maybe just that kind of an open-ended question about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think where we're going is the continued commoditization of it, as if it wasn't already commoditized enough. But you're going to continue to see, especially in crowded verticals where there's a lot of MSPs vying for market share and trying to stay relevant with their clients. You're going to see price continue to margins shrink. Kind of how with carriers we saw that happen, and now very slim margins on internet and telephony services. So you're going to see that continue to shrink. But I think a way to combat that is what I talked about, bringing out new services that are more business focused. So I think the successful MSPs, at least, are going to shift into more of the consultant approach as like a big four type of approach, right? Whiteboarding with their
But
clients,
without the price
learning their
tag.
clients'
Yes.
businesses inside and out. Yeah. Right. Well, again, that's what I talk about with the power vacuum, right? You come up to an issue, you charge what you know you can charge to pay your people well and keep them happy and keep them servicing the clients, right? But typically, that's still going to be below what a price would be to go to a KPMG or something like that, right? So, and you're providing a managed services, and it's funny because you see those other consulting agencies they're trying to offer these managed services now, and they are, so again, the commoditization of the market, it's all becoming one big amalgam of fractional consumption. But all that to say is I think the smaller to mid-size MSPs where they can find success is really getting to know their client's business inside and out, and really offering business solutions through technology because that's what they're experts at.
Fantastic. So, Jesse, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you to know more about PowerPSA? And then the second question is kind of related to that. Somebody watches this video, said, "This is a guy I want to work with. I can use his expertise, the
Yeah.
company, and so on. What's the first engagement look like
Mhm.
for that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, best way to reach me is probably through LinkedIn messaging, actually. But I do have an email you can send to info@powerpsa.com. And that gets checked daily. So if you want to shoot an email, or you can go to the website and chat as well. But probably LinkedIn's the easiest way to get a hold of me. And my LinkedIn tag name is SecOps Warrior. That's SecOpsWarrior. So what a typical engagement looks like, we start with workshops, whether it's doing channel enablement for a vendor, working with a MSP, or maybe an organization who we're just right sizing internal IT or security processes. A lot of you know start with workshops, and so we're going to talk. We're going to whiteboard out how we do processes. We're going to do some of those things I talked about, saying, "Hey, what does everyone see the problem as? What are the three biggest problems?" Now, we may have an idea of that going in, but again, there's going to be a lot of fact finding initially. And then based on that, we'll do some quantitative measurements saying, hey, we think, here's where we see this piece of your operations. Here's a deficiency in your technology stack where we think you should be offering this service, right? And then then we'll go into decision making stage, talking about how do we build offerings, how do we right size offerings, should we get rid of this offering, how do these technology stacks work with each other. It's more of an operations focus at that point to begin priming the pump and planning for takeoff. Following that, we'll go and start tabletopping, designing processes, integrating some of these playbooks that I've developed and things like that for how to actually run the services, right? Training salespeople, how to talk to the clients about them, making sure everyone in the organization understands the new things that we're doing, and everyone can be a little mini salesman to the client. I think that's a big piece that is missed along the way. And then finally, starting to tabletop and iterate, right? Starting to integrate these things, putting these processes in place, testing them out on ourselves, testing them on one of our favorite one or two clients, like we talked about, fixing any major issues, and then go to launch and say, hey, we're going full market attack. And at the same time, we're doing all of this, we're building suspense with the clients. Hey, we've heard you. We we know you guys want X, Y, and Z. Something big is coming, date X. And we go to our clients, and then we start setting meetings. And I can even ride along in these meetings with clients if they want, um, and talking through, here's all the new services we're offering, here's why we're offering them, here's why they're good for your business, this is the new us, so to speak. And then launch, and then I can ride along for as long or as short at that piece, with my clients as they want from that point on. And I have some clients who say, well, vCISO is one that's really tough, we'd like you to continuously advise on our vCISO program and help do X, Y, and Z. And so I can do that as well. So hopefully that wasn't too long, but that's kind of what
No, no,
an engagement
it
would
is
look like.
perfect, and you have an intrinsic motive to make them successful. Their success is your success. More success stories are a testament for the company, for the Power PSA, as well as they grow, you grow. They'll probably need more and more services
Yeah.
they offer. They need more of your time, and potentially can hire you for additional projects. So it's there's definitely a synergy there. So thank you very much, Jesse, for
Yeah.
being part of this show, and much appreciated. And looking forward to hopefully maybe a second session, and maybe meeting you in person one day in one of these upcoming events that we all have across the country. And
Yeah. I'm
until
sure.
then, thank you very much for everyone for joining and tuning in. And until then, stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jesse.
All right. Yeah. Take care, everyone. Thanks.